Hello friends. We know that the history of humans and the history of environment mutually influence one another. Soil, rainfall, vegetation, climate and environment, all these factors have a considerable influence on the evolution of human cultures. Slowly, what happens? The technological progress empowers the humans to conquer their environment. Like for example, modern communication systems such as air travel has helped us to reach from one end of the country to the other in a matter of hours by evading the great natural barriers like mountains, rivers, oceans, which would have otherwise made things very difficult. However, such technological progress has been achieved just recently. Things were not so easier in the ancient times when humans were totally dependent on the environmental setting. So as we move back in time, it becomes necessary to appreciate and understand the geography, environment and physical regions that had a bearing on the Indian history. In this lecture, we shall try to acquaint you with physical features of the Indian subcontinent which had a significant influence on its historical developments. Historically, the emergence of settlements in different regions have been quite uneven, and different regions have been characterized by different features which are largely influenced by geography and environment. For example, we find that wheat is the staple food of the population in Punjab, Haryana and western Uttar Pradesh region, while rice is the principal crop and main component in the diet of people in the eastern India, including Bihar, Bengal and Odisha. So why these differences? These are the reasons. Different crops have different natural habitat zones. They tend to grow in specific environments which are suited to them. In due course, they influence the dietary habits of the people residing in this region. Similarly, the irrigation methods are different for different regions. The rivers, canals have been the most important form of irrigation in northern India. Ponds have been very useful in eastern India, while tank irrigation system has played a significant role in the southern Indian agriculture. So these variations do not mean that rivers are unimportant in eastern and southern regions. But what they reflect is people adopt different methods to supplement additional water sources in different regions, depending on what method is most suitable for that particular region. While the riverine plains and deltas have given birth to and sustained advanced cultures throughout the ages, the mountains intermediate zone of central India has retained heavy concentration of tribal population in various pockets. In that case, while the riverine plains are gifted by nature, the isolated regions remain unaffected by the advances made in other regions. Coexistence of different forms of dress, food habitats, cultures in the subcontinent can largely be explained with reference to the physical geography. Let us now have a look at the physical features of the Indian subcontinent and the characteristics of the regions created by them. If you have studied geography, then you might be well aware that the physical geography of the Indian subcontinent provides these four main landscape profiles, each involved in the shaping of ancient India. So these are the profiles: Himalayan uplands, Indus and Indo-Gangetic plains, peninsular India and the coastal regions. So let us discuss them individually. So first are the Himalayan uplands. There is a great chain of northern mountains stretching from Suleiman, Hindu Kush and Chitral Valley in the northwest to the Karakorams and the Himalayas in the north-central region, which extend further into the east. It was considered for a long time that Himalayas stood as a natural barrier to protect India against invasions from the outside. This mountain chain may appear to be impenetrable to the outside world, but in fact, numerous mountain passes are dotted along its continuity. Now what is a pass? A pass is a gap or a break in the high mountain range. You can simply say that a pass is a low-lying valley between high mountain ranges and acts as the easiest way for the people to travel through. The most famous passes such as the Bolan, Gomal and the Khyber Pass in the northwestern region have heavily influenced our past. These passes are situated in the Hindu Kush, Suleiman and Kirtar ranges. From prehistoric times, there was a continuous flow of traffic through these passes. It was through these valleys that the earliest humans from Eastern Africa and later on many people came to India as invaders and immigrants. The earliest discovered instances of well-established and settled agricultural society in the Indian subcontinent is at Mehergarh, which lies in the hills between Bolan Pass and the Indus Plain. You can see in this video how this terrain is studded with deep valleys and curves, and how difficult it might have been to cross these ranges, especially when there was no modern forms of communications available at that time. So from as early as 7000 BC, communities there started investing increased labor in preparing the land and selecting, planting and harvesting in this region. From around 3800 to 3500 before Common Era, some communities moved and expanded down from the Mehergad's hilly uplands onto the alluvial Indus Plains, developing new relationships with the transforming ecology. These communities settled in this fertile Indus region for centuries to come, and these are famously known as Indus Valley Civilization. In the next thousands of years or so, the Indus Valley Civilization flourished like anything, and thereafter the Indo-Aryans, the Indo-Greeks, Kushanas, Hunas and Turks entered India through these passes. The Swat Valley in this region formed another important role. The great Alexander of Macedonia came India through this Swat Valley region. This Swat Valley region was also a major center for early Buddhism under the ancient kingdom of Gandhara, and this continued till 10th century Common Era, after which the area became largely Muslim populated. Apart from invading armies, missionaries and merchants also came to India using these routes. So these passes in northwestern mountains had facilitated trade as well as cultural contacts between India and the Central Asian region. Also, some remote high-altitude passes linked India directly to Tibet. The Buddhism also spread from India into the Central Asian region along these passes. So historically, the Afghan and the Balochistan hills have acted as an important frontier zone for cultural contacts. On the other hand, the mountain ranges of the northeastern region had fewer passes. So they somehow acted as a barrier between India and China. However, that has not prevented the flow of cultural influences from Southeast Asia and the southern China region in prehistoric and historic times. Now let's have a look at how these river systems influence the history. This Indus River begins its long course from the Tibetan plains. It flows towards the northwest and then drops down south, flowing through Kashmir and the Punjab regions and then emptying into the Arabian Sea. We can divide this Indus Plains into two regions, Punjab and Sindh. Punjab literally means the land of 5 rivers. As shown in this picture, these 5 tributaries of Indus River flowing across a vast alluvial plain have made this region the breadbasket of the Indian subcontinent. We had discussed how the Mehergad settlement in the high hills gave way to the Indus settlements in the fertile alluvial plains. So these alluvial plains, especially in the Punjab region, has always been a meeting place and melting pot of different cultures. The strategic location and the prosperity of Punjab has always invited invaders. These large freshwater rivers were a ready source of water and also provided a ready source of food, since the seasonal flooding of the rivers provided fertile soil for growing crops. With the ability to grow crops and surplus of food and with water nearby, there was no longer a need to move from place to place in search of resources. The Indus Plain had nurtured the subcontinent's first urban culture during the 3rd and 2nd millennium BC. Two of its major cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, are located in this Punjab and Sindh regions. The Harappan culture that developed on the banks of the Indus River to the west had modern facilities like bathhouses and fountains, and they also had indoor plumbing in their cities. On the other hand, we can find the origin of two parallel rivers from the Indian Himalayas, the Ganges and the Yamuna. These rivers flow into the southeast, meeting at the modern city of Allahabad and then progress directly east, finishing off in the Bay of Bengal. Human settlements along the Ganges River started somewhat later than the Indus Valley region, but many of these settlements still exist today. In this region, we can find some of the most important cities in the Indian cultural history. After the arrival of Aryans in the Indian subcontinent, it was the towns along the Ganges River system that served as holy cities for much of Hinduism. This river became crucial to the beliefs of people throughout India. Now the Ganga Basin is climatically more humid than the Indus region, and the annual rainfall in this region steadily varies from 50 centimeters to 200 centimeters. So this region was more suitable for human settlements as compared to the Indus region. The Ganga Plains can be subdivided into the following 3 subregions: upper, middle and lower. We can find the upper plains in the southern Uttaranchal region and the western or central Uttar Pradesh region between the Ganga and the Yamuna rivers, which are known as Doab, which literally means the land of two rivers. This area has been marked by conflicts and cultural fusion since ancient times. The Harappan culture also made inroads into this region. This was also the center of painted graveware culture and the region of pulsating activities during the later Vedic period. The terminal point of Doab is Prayag, now known as Allahabad, which is situated at the confluence of Ganga and the Yamuna. This confluence or Sangam witnesses a swarm of devotees taking bath on auspicious days even today. Now from this confluence point of Ganga and Yamuna from the city of Prayagraj, the middle Gangetic plains begin, which includes the region from eastern Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. This is where the ancient Koshala, Kashi and Magadha kingdoms were situated. It was the center of city life, money, economy and trade since 6th century BC. This region provided the basis for Mauryan imperial expansion and it continued to be politically important till the Gupta period. Then we have this lower Gangetic plains which terminate with the province of Bengal. In this region, rainfall in low-lying plains created forests and marshlands, making settlements in the early Bengal a very difficult scheme. Later on, with greater utilization and control of iron technology, the fertility of the heavy alluvial soil of this region was exploited, leading to the spread of urban culture into this region. The Gangetic plains have nurtured maximum number of settlements and sustained the highest population density than any other physiographic region of the subcontinent. It has been the heartland of Indian civilization from 1st millennium BC throughout the classical phase and up to the present. The third one is the Brahmaputra, which also starts from Tibet. It flows east for hundreds of miles and then turns southwest into India, progressing through the Garo hills and converging with the Padma river, which is also a tributary of river Ganges, and finally ending up in the Bay of Bengal. The lower Gangetic Valley and the North Bengal really came into focus in the age of Guptas. And finally the Brahmaputra Valley covering Assam gained importance in the early medieval times. It is in the vast plains and river valleys of these three great northern river systems that the great concentration of subcontinent's population lived and built cities in the ancient period. Ample water from the glaciers and monsoon rains has been the lifeblood of this region. These river systems also served as arteries of commerce and communications because in ancient times it was difficult to build roads and so men and material were moved by boat. The river routes therefore well served military and commercial transport. For example, the stone pillars built by Ashoka were transported to different parts of the country by boat. The importance of rivers for communications continued till the days of East India Company as well. Some of the important towns and capitals such as Hastinapur, Prayag, Varanasi, Patliputra were situated on these banks of these three river systems. In the ancient period, this Patliputra had remained the capital for Mauryas, Guptas and many other kingdoms. Today, in the modern times, urban cities are located at railway junctions or road junctions or industrial or mining zones. But in the pre-industrial times, towns were mostly situated on river banks and junctions. Apart from all these things, it was these rivers which demarcated political and cultural boundaries as well. For example, in the eastern part of the Indian peninsula, the area known as Kalinga, covering the coastal belt of Odisha, was situated between the Mahanadi to the north and Godavari to the south. Similarly, Andhra Pradesh largely lay between Godavari to the north and Krishna to the south. Even a major part of Tamil Nadu was situated between Krishna to the north and Kaveri to the south. Also, the Kaveri Valley formed a distinct geographical zone and became the seat of Chola power a little before the beginning of Christian era. Okay, let us now peek into the peninsular region. We can find the Vindhya Mountains to the south of the Gangetic Plains, which in ancient times acted as a great barriers to communication between the north and the south. However, they too were never entirely impenetrable. Passages on the two sides of the Vindhyas allowed access between the two natural divisions. And it was through these corridors that the Brahman priests from the north were able to migrate to the south for settlement and missionary work for the promotion of Vedic Hinduism. With the crossing of the Vindhyas, one enters the rather inhospitable plateau of Deccan or the south, which is located in the rain shadow of the monsoon winds. So what does this rain shadow area means? Let us discuss about that. We know that the Indian monsoon system bring in moisture-rich winds to the Indian subcontinent. Now these great mountains act as a natural barrier to these moisture-laden winds. What happens is that these winds rise towards the top of the mountains where it condenses and precipitates before it crosses to the other side. Since the maximum precipitation happens on one side of the mountain due to condensation of the moisture-laden winds, once the air crosses the other side, there is no or very little moisture left, which leads to creation of dry conditions on the other side of the mountain. So this opposite side of the mountain, which is also known as leeward side, experiences very less or no rainfall. That is why it is known as the rain shadow region. In the Indian context, we can find these Western Ghats, or otherwise known as Sahyadri mountains, along the western lining of the Indian peninsula. Now these Sahyadri mountains acts as a barrier to the monsoonal winds. Once the mountain blocks these winds, they rise up, they get condensed, and the maximum precipitation occurs along the western coast of these Ghats. So the other side, the opposite side, or the eastern part, becomes the rain shadow region. So these areas like the northern Karnataka, the Solapur Plateau and the Vidarbha region lying along the eastern part of the Sahyadri mountains experience dry conditions due to this rain shadow zone. This thirsty Deccan land suffers from the fact that its main water supply comes from the rains which are limited to the monsoon season only, and that the rivers carrying little water in comparison to those of north, which are obviously fed by glaciers. However, because of presence of fertile soil in the Deccan region, it yields good crops even in the absence of irrigation. These three rivers, the Narmada, the Tapti and the Mahanadi, with their source in the Vindhyas, bring a sparse sufficiency of water to Gujarat and Odisha. But the other five major rivers, the Godavari, Krishna, Tungabhadra, Pennar and Kaveri, are poorer in flow than the northern rivers. There are no glaciers and therefore the quantity of water brought down by these rivers is extremely limited. On the eastern coast, there are parallel eastern Ghats, but not a single major river rises from them. So this peninsular region has a major water problem, which is why the southern people have from the earliest times in ancient history practiced irrigation. Irrigation and commerce, both trans-Indian and international, gave the Deccan its importance. Besides, we can also find some passes in the western Ghats like the Junnar and Kanheri, which link the trade routes to the western ports. For many centuries in the ancient world, great regional kingdoms arose and fell in this area. The kingdoms of Satavahanas, Chalukyas, Rashtrakutas and the Vijayanagara Empire. We can also find some of the finest rock-cut temples, monuments and palaces cut out of volcanic rock of the Deccan in this region. This testifies the wealth and glory of these kingdoms. As the volcanic Deccan rocks are easier to cut, we find a number of rock-cut monasteries and temples in the Deccan region. Further in the south, below the Deccan region, along the Malabar and the Coromandel coasts, we can also find the ancient kingdoms of Kerala and Tamil people. The lesser terrain, irrigation skills and the international trade created the prosperity of these lands from as early as 1st millennium CE. Another area of importance is Gujarat, which is situated on the western fringe of the central Indian belt. Now Gujarat can also be divided into the following natural divisions: Saurashtra, Kutch, Anartha, Central Gujarat and the Lata. As shown in this map, the Anartha region is characterized by semi-arid wind-blown soils, while the southern part or the Lata region has fertile soil. The central peninsula of Gujarat is called Kathiawar. The low-lying rann of Kutch is another feature which during the monsoons turns up into a swamp. In spite of these physical subdivisions, Gujarat has its own cultural identity and unity. This is because it is broadly bounded by the Vindhyas and the Western Ghats in the east and by the desert on the north. Although it appears to have been a zone of isolation, actually it is a region of continuous ancient settlements dating back from the Harappan period. The Saurashtra region, on account of its geographical closeness to the Indus, experienced an extension of Harappan civilization. The Saurashtra region has always been a transition zone between the Sindh and the lands farther west into the Indian peninsula. The plain here is enriched by alluvium brought from the central Indian hills by the Narmada, Tapti and Sabarmati rivers. Also, the Malwa region served as an important neighborhood for Gujarat ports, and many wars were fought between the Deccan and the northern powers for possession of this Malwa and Gujarat region. Because of its protected position and the lengthy coastline, Gujarat has been the focus of coastal and external trade for more than 4,000 years. On the eastern side of the Indian peninsula, we can find the coastal plains of Odisha lying southwest to the delta of Ganga and which is centered largely on the Mahanadi Basin. Now there is a narrow strip of the Orissa coast between the Gangetic hills and the sea which offers an easy access from the eastern India to the eastern part of the Deccan Plateau. This Odisha region was naturally protected by extensive forests and mountains in the mainland, and it was bound by sea on the east. So this remained immune from invasions from Ganga Plain over a long periods of time. Nevertheless, several incursions did take place from the Ganga Plains into Odisha along this route. For information, the king Ashoka also used this direct route from Magadha to Kalinga for his famous Kalinga War. Subsequently, this route was also used by King Kharavela for movement in the reverse direction from Kalinga to Magadha. By late 1st millennium AD, Odisha had begun to develop her distinct linguistic and cultural identity. To the extreme south, the area occupied by the states of Tamil Nadu and Kerala constitute the southern part of the Indian subcontinent. Geographically, linguistically and culturally, Tamil Nadu has always evolved an individuality of its own. So this was a brief discussion about the peninsular India. Now let us discuss about the coastal regions. As the peninsular India is gifted with a long coastline, the people of this region took keen interest in the maritime activities. A great deal of trade and commerce went on through these seaways from the earliest times. In the east, mariners reached countries like Java, Sumatra, Burma and Cambodia. It was to the ports of western coastline running from the Indus Delta to the southern tip of India that traders and travelers from countries such as Mesopotamia, Arabia, Persia, Egypt and Ethiopia and those of the Roman Empire and the Eastern Africa came, traded, exchanged ideas and sometimes settled here. Similarly, on the eastern coast, trade and traffic flowed between India and Southeast Asia. In the ancient world, India was the hub of sea routes to everywhere. In the south, Kerala has a history of spice trade with the west since the post-Mauryan times. For example, in the Malabar coast, which is in the present-day Kerala region, we can find a number of international ports such as Kochi and Kozhikode, which were used for spice trade with the west since the post-Mauryan times. It is therefore not surprising that Kerala became the first region in the South Asia to witness the direct influence of seafaring Christians and later on of the Arabs. Also, archaeologists have discovered some Chinese fishing boats in the coastal Kerala region, which implies that Kerala had maritime interaction with China as well. So each of these areas in the Indian subcontinent bounded by rivers, in some cases by mountains, and sometimes with deltas and plateaus, constituted a political and administrative unit in which different ruling dynasties rose and fell. On account of difficult communications in a vast country and the defensibility of the natural frontiers, it was not easy for the ruling class of one region to establish its control over all other regions. Gradually, every region grew into a distinct cultural unit with its own style, life, and language. But we can find that in the northern and western parts of the Indian subcontinent, most languages were derived from the same Indo-Aryan stock and hence had many elements in common. What is also important is that virtually throughout India, Sanskrit came to be cultivated and understood. We have already discussed that the Vindhya Mountains cut right across India from west to east and form a boundary between North and South India. The speakers of the Dravidian languages lived in the south of Vindhyas and those of the Indo-Aryan languages to the north of them. In between lived tribal people in the Vindhyan regions, where they are still found at present. In the ancient times, despite the difficulties of communication, people moved from north to south and vice versa. This led to a give and take relationship in culture and language. Repeatedly, the northern powers moved down to the south and the southern rulers moved up to the north. So did traders, missionaries, cultural leaders, and particularly the Brahmanas also used to move from north to south and vice versa. This two-way movement of traffic helped in development of a composite culture that we are witnessing today. Although most regions had well-defined natural frontiers, not every region possessed the required resources to sustain livelihoods in isolation. Therefore, from prehistoric times itself, the common need for metals and other resources led to a network of interconnection between different regions of the country. This is why the exploitation of natural resources in the prehistoric times has an important bearing on the Indian history. Until human settlements developed on a large scale, substantial areas of the Indian plains prospered in thickly forested areas which supplied food and timber. In the early times, when burnt bricks were not much in use, timber houses were constructed. We can find these timber houses in the Patliputra region, which is also known as the India's first important capital. For construction and tool making, all kinds of stones, including sandstone, were available in India. Since the Deccan rocks were easy to cut and work with, we can find more number of temples and pieces of sculpture in the Deccan region as compared to other regions of the Indian subcontinent. Coming to the minerals, copper was widely distributed in India. The richest copper mines are located in the Chota Nagpur Plateau region, particularly in the Singhbhum district. The earliest people who used copper tools in the present-day Bihar region exploited the copper mines of Singhbhum and Hazaribagh, and many copper tools have been discovered in South Bihar and parts of Madhya Pradesh as well. Rich copper deposits are also found in the Khetri mines in Rajasthan. These were tapped by both pre-Vedic and Vedic people who lived in areas now covered by Pakistan, Rajasthan, Gujarat and the Ganga Yamuna Doab region. Since copper was first metal to be used, it is still used by the Hindus with great purity, and the utensils made of copper are still used in religious rituals. Today, India produces virtually no tin, and this was scarce even in the ancient times. There is a reason to believe that it was found in Rajasthan, southern Madhya Pradesh and Bihar region, but the deposits have been virtually exhausted. Since the bronze, which is an alloy, is made by mixing tin with copper, we do not find many bronze objects in the prehistoric times due to the unavailability of tin. The Harappans possibly produced some tin from Rajasthan, but their main supply came from Afghanistan, and even this was limited. That is why, although the Harappan people used bronze tools, their number in comparison to those found in the Western Asia and Egypt is very small. Therefore, the major part of India had no proper Bronze Age, that is an age in which tools and implements were largely made of bronze. Starting with the early centuries of the Christian era, India developed close connections with Myanmar and Malay Peninsula, which had an abundance of tin. This made possible the use of bronze on a large scale, especially for the statues of gods in the southern India. Since long, India has been rich in iron ores. These are particularly found in the southern Bihar region, eastern Madhya Pradesh and Karnataka. Once the art of smelting using bellows, which are used for making steel, was learned, iron was used for war and more usefully to clear forests and for deep and regular cultivation. The formation of First Empire in Magadha in the 6th to 4th century BC owed much to the availability of iron just to the south of this region. Besides, the large-scale use of iron made Avanti, with its capital at Ujjain, as an important kingdom in the 6th and 5th centuries BC. Also, the Satavahanas and the other dynasties that arose from the Vindhyas might have exploited the iron ores of Andhra and Karnataka region. Now coming to the making of coins, Andhra possessed a good source of lead. This also explains the large number of lead coins in the kingdom of Satavahanas, who ruled over Andhra and Maharashtra region in the first 2 centuries of Christian era. The earliest coins, called the Panchmark Coins, were largely made of silver, although this metal is rarely found in India. However, some 18th century accounts speak of existence of silver mines in early times in the Kharagpur hills in the Monghir district. This accounts for the use of white metal in the earliest Panchmark coins found in Bihar. Besides, large quantities of gold dust, which were carried by the river streams from the Himalayas, were collected from the deposits of river channels in the plains. These deposits are called placers. Now, as depicted in this figure, a placer deposit is nothing but simple deposit of valuable minerals formed by gravity separation from a specific source of rock during the sedimentary process. So earlier, the gold dust was collected from these placer deposits in the Himalayan region. We know that gold is found in the Kolar goldfields of Karnataka, which is quite famous. A very early trace of gold has been found at a new Stone Age site of around 1800 BC in the Karnataka region. However, these gold fields were never exploited till the beginning of the 2nd century AD. Kolar is considered to be the earliest capital of Ganga dynasty of southern Karnataka region. Much of the gold used in early times was obtained from Central Asia and the Roman Empire. Gold coins therefore came into regular use during the first 5 centuries of the Christian era. As the local resources were insufficient to maintain the gold currency over a long spell of time, once the supply from outside stopped, gold coins became rare. In ancient times, India also produced a wide variety of precious stones, including pearls, especially in central India, Odisha, and southern India. Precious stones formed an important item of trade in articles which were eagerly sought for by the Romans in the early century of the Christian era. So we have seen how the environmental conditions have influenced different patterns of growth and development in different regions. The famous geographer Richard Hakluyt once said that geography and chronology are the right eye and left eye of history. This is true. The environmental setting and the availability and utilization of resources in different regions has resulted in uneven patterns of growth in the Indian subcontinent. Therefore, the unfolding of the historical process has neither been even nor uniform throughout the country. However, geography and environment cannot be taken as some kind of prime movers of history. After all, the natural regions are only areas of possibilities, and these possibilities are actualized through human intervention at the stage of their technological attainments. It has been argued, nature determines the route of development while man determines the rate and state. Neither is the influence of nature fixed, nor is the man-made relationship static. The limits set by the nature are conquered by human experience or by human beings with their tools. This is an ongoing process which continuously enriches the realm of human experience and expands the frontier of man's control over environment. Physical features and environmental conditions that may appear unfavorable or difficult at one stage may prove to be potentially rich at another. As we move along with our journey, you will witness the triumphs and turbulences of our people in its entire historical process. But for now, it's a goodbye.